I want to tell you about a moment that happened so privately and so routinely that most of the people I have worked with over the past 4 decades did not even think to mention it until I asked directly, because they assumed it was just what mornings feel like now, just the way getting older works. And when I said, "Tell me about the first 30 seconds after you open your eyes, what happens in your body before your feet hit the floor?" nearly every one of them over 60 described some version of the same experience, which is this. You come out of sleep not gradually but suddenly, pulled into consciousness by something you cannot name, and before you have a single thought, before you remember what day it is or what is on the schedule, something is already wrong. Something heavy and shapeless is sitting in your chest or pressing against the back of your skull or pulling your entire body downward into the mattress, and you lie there trying to find the source, scanning your mind for whatever bad thing must have happened to produce this feeling. And you cannot find one. There is no crisis and no emergency. There is just this weight, this flatness, this emotional weather that rolled in while you were unconscious and settled over everything before you had a chance to close the windows. And by the time you finally get up and make coffee, the feeling has not left. It has just been pushed to the background, where it hums at a level too low for anyone else to notice, but loud enough that you feel it in every interaction, in every task, in the effort it takes to arrange your face into the expression it needs to wear in order to convince the world that you are fine. That is not aging. That is not just how mornings work now. That is something real and identifiable happening inside your brain. And the fact that almost nobody I have worked with knew this, the fact that they had been absorbing this experience morning after morning for years and writing it off as normal, is one of the quiet failures of how we talk about emotional health in older adults. Let me walk you through what is actually happening inside your brain between the moment you close your eyes at night and the moment you open them in the morning, because once you understand it, you will never again look at a bad morning the same way. Sleep is not rest the way most people think of rest. Your brain does not shut down when you close your eyes. Sleep is one of the most active things your brain does in an entire day, and one of its most important jobs during sleep is emotional housekeeping. During the deepest stages of sleep, your brain takes the hard experiences from the day, the frustrations, the worries, the small hurts, and it works through them in a way that softens the emotional weight while keeping the memory of what happened intact. Matthew Walker, a sleep researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, describes this as overnight therapy. During deep sleep, the brain's stress chemicals drop to their lowest point of the entire day, and in that calm state, the brain can revisit difficult experiences without feeling the full force of them, the way it did when they first happened. When this system is working the way it should, you go to bed carrying the emotional weight of the day, and you wake up lighter, not because the world changed overnight, but because your brain spent the night taking the sharp edges off your hardest feelings and putting everything back in order. And here is what changes after 60. And here is why your mornings have started to feel the way they feel. The deepest stage of sleep, the stage where this emotional housekeeping happens, declines dramatically across a lifetime. By the time a person reaches their 70s, they may have lost as much as 75% of the deep sleep they had in their 20s. At the same time, the lighter, more emotionally active stages of sleep become fragmented, broken up by brief awakenings that interrupt the brain's ability to complete the full cycle of emotional processing that younger brains handle without any difficulty at all. You still sleep, but the sleep you get is shallower, lighter, and far less capable of doing the emotional maintenance your brain depends on. What this means in plain terms is that the overnight therapy is being cut short. Your brain goes to bed with a full day's worth of unfinished emotional business, the frustrations you swallowed, the anxieties you pushed aside, the quiet grief that comes with the losses that accumulate at this stage of life, and it tries to process all of it during sleep, but the sleep keeps getting interrupted before the job is done. The difficult feelings do not get fully worked through. They go back into storage, still carrying their original weight, still marked by the brain as unresolved. And when you wake up the next morning, the leftover material from everything that did not get processed is sitting there, waiting for you. And that is the heaviness you feel before you have had a single conscious thought. But the broken sleep is only half of the story. The other half is about what happens inside the brain during those first minutes of waking. And this is the part that explains why morning feelings are so much harder to manage than feelings that arrive later in the day. Your brain runs two systems that work together to keep your emotions manageable. One is the alarm system, which sits deep inside the brain and is responsible for detecting anything threatening or upsetting and generating feelings of worry and dread in response. The other is the calming system, which sits behind your forehead and works like a steady, reasonable voice that looks at whatever the alarm system is reacting to and says, "Hold on, let us think about this. This is not as serious as it feels. You can handle this." During the day, these two systems are in constant conversation, and the calming system is strong enough to keep the alarm system in check, which is why you can think about something painful at 2 in the afternoon and feel a brief heaviness and then move on with your day. Here is what research has shown happens when sleep is shallow and broken. The alarm system becomes roughly 60% more reactive to negative feelings and difficult memories. At the same time, and this is the part that matters most, the calming system loses its connection to the alarm system. The two stop communicating effectively. During the day, when the alarm rings, the calming system picks up right away and talks it down. After a night of poor, deep sleep, the alarm rings just as loudly, but the calming system does not answer. It is as though the phone is ringing in an empty room. And in older adults, this problem is compounded by something that happens every single morning, regardless of sleep quality, which is that the calming system is the very last part of the brain to come fully online after sleep, while the alarm system activates almost immediately. This means there is a window, those first minutes after you open your eyes, when you are experiencing the emotional world through a brain whose alarm is fully engaged and whose calming system is still waking up. And that window is exactly where the weight lands, the flatness arrives, the dread settles in without a reason. And you lie there wondering what is wrong with you when what is actually wrong is a temporary gap between a system that woke up too fast and a system that has not caught up yet. And there is a layer beneath all of this that works so quietly, most people never recognize it as the source. When overnight emotional processing does not finish, the leftover material accumulates, and the brain begins trying to process it during the only time it has available, which is the quiet moments, the pauses, and most painfully, the first minutes of morning, when nothing else is competing for your attention. This is why your worst thoughts arrive before breakfast. Your brain is not choosing to torment you. It is trying, in the only way it can, to finish a job that sleep was supposed to handle and did not. And the experience of that unfinished processing feels, from the inside, exactly like sadness, exactly like dread, exactly like something is deeply wrong, even though you cannot point to what it is. And this brings me to the point that I believe changes everything when people hear it, because I have watched it change the way people understand their own mornings and their own lives. What I have just described, the weight on waking, the morning heaviness, the feeling that something is wrong before you have done anything wrong, is not the same thing as depression. It can look exactly like depression, and if it goes on long enough without being understood or addressed, it can become depression. But there is a difference, and the difference matters enormously. Depression is constant. It does not care what time of day it is. It sits on you at 9 in the morning, and it sits on you at 3 in the afternoon, and it sits on you at 7 in the evening. What many people over 60 experience is something different. It is heaviest in the first hours of the day, and it gradually lightens as the morning goes on, as the calming system finally comes fully online. as the day's activities begin to give the brain something else to focus on. And by afternoon, most people feel more like themselves. If that pattern sounds familiar to you, if your mornings are consistently your hardest hours, and by later in the day you feel closer to, okay, that timing is important because it tells you that what you are dealing with is not a mood that is broken, but a system that needs support. And those are two very different things that call for two very different responses. Your body's internal clock also plays a role that almost nobody explains to people your age. As you get older, the entire rhythm of your sleep-wake cycle shifts earlier. You feel sleepy earlier in the evening, and you wake earlier in the morning. And this means the final hours of sleep, the hours between roughly 4 and 7 in the morning, when the most emotionally important stages of sleep normally occur, are the very hours that are most vulnerable to disruption. Because the body's drive toward wakefulness is already building, and the sleep is already becoming lighter. You are, in a very real sense, waking up before your brain has finished its overnight work, and the emotional residue of that unfinished work is what greets you when you open your eyes. What I tell the people who sit across from me is that the morning wait is not a verdict about who you are or what your life has become. It is not proof that something is fundamentally wrong with you. It is the result of a biological process that is not completing. And knowing this does not make the feeling disappear, but it does something almost as powerful, which is, it takes away the story the feeling generates. Because when you wake up with that heaviness and do not know why, your brain does what brains always do with unexplained feelings. It goes looking for a reason. And because the alarm system is running the search, the reasons it finds are always dark. My life is small, nobody needs me. Something is wrong with me that cannot be fixed. But those thoughts are not discoveries. They are explanations your brain is creating to make sense of a physical state that has a mechanical cause. And the moment you understand that, the moment you can feel the weight arrive and say to yourself, this is not the truth about my life. This is leftover emotional material from a sleep cycle that got cut short. The dark thoughts lose some of their authority. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to get your feet on the floor. Enough to make the coffee. Enough to begin the day without the conviction that the heaviness is telling you something true about your worth. Protecting those final hours of sleep is, for many people over 60, the single most impactful thing they can do for their emotional health. This means managing light in the evening, keeping the bedroom dark and cool, reducing the things that fragment the last hours of the night, and understanding that waking early may not be natural readiness, but a shift in your internal clock cutting off the very sleep your emotional brain needs most. And it means talking to someone, whether that is a counselor or a doctor or a person you trust, about what your mornings actually feel like, because the vast majority of older adults living with this have never mentioned it to anyone because they assumed it was just part of getting older. It is common. But common and normal are not the same thing. And confusing the two is how an entire generation came to accept a daily emotional burden they did not have to carry. You are not broken. Your mornings are not proof that you have become someone smaller or less capable of feeling alive. Your mornings are proof that your brain is still trying to process everything you carry, every loss, every worry, every piece of unfinished feeling from a life long enough and full enough to hold real weight. And the system responsible for that processing needs more support than it is currently getting. That support exists. That help is real. And the first step toward it is the one you may have never thought to take, which is simply telling someone the truth about what happens in those first 30 seconds after you open your eyes, because that truth, which you have been holding alone and in silence morning after morning, is not a weakness and is not a complaint. It is the most important thing your brain has been trying to tell you, and you deserve to have someone finally listen.